All right, everyone, welcome back to Talk Radar. I want to walk you through something tonight that I think really illustrates a lot of the issues we see in these traffic stops, particularly when alcohol gets involved, and particularly when people think that their status or their connections are going to get them out of trouble. This happened on March 15th, 2025 in Florida, and what we're about to watch is body cam footage from an officer who pulled over a white Jeep in the middle of a heavy storm. Now, I need you to understand something. It was raining heavily. I'm talking about a legitimate downpour, the kind of rain that makes driving difficult even when you're completely sober, even when you're paying full attention, even when you're doing everything right. This is not a night to be out drinking. This is not a night to be getting behind the wheel after you've had anything to drink. But that's exactly what we have here. So the officer is patrolling this residential area and he spots this white Jeep just going way too fast for the conditions. I mean, he's watching this thing speed through and it's running stop signs. It's not slowing down appropriately. It's driving in a manner that is clearly erratic, clearly dangerous, and in these conditions, with this rain, with reduced visibility, with reduced traction, this is the kind of driving that kills people. This is the kind of driving that ends lives. And the officer recognizes this, so he activates his lights and sirens to get this vehicle to pull over. But here's where things get interesting. The vehicle doesn't immediately stop. It keeps going for a while before it finally pulls over. And when it does pull over, it actually strikes the curb. It hits the curb as it's trying to stop. Now, the officer is already concerned at this point because number one, the driving was erratic. Number two, they didn't stop promptly when lights and sirens were activated. And number three, they hit something. They struck the curb. So he approaches the vehicle and what he finds is a woman in the driver's seat who can barely form coherent sentences. The officer approaches and he starts asking her basic questions. How are you? Are you okay? Do you have your license and registration? And what does he get back? He gets back a rambling, incoherent response that doesn't really answer any of his questions. She starts apologizing before she even knows what the stop is for, which is unusual. She says things like, it's just been windy and then everything has been, I'm just trying to, and she trails off. She doesn't finish the sentence. That's not normal. That's not how a sober person responds to a simple question. A sober person says, yes, officer, here is my license. Or, no, officer, I don't have it on me. Or something that makes sense. What we get here is disjointed thinking, incomplete thoughts, and responses that don't match the questions that were asked. The officer asks her if she's okay, and she responds with something completely nonsensical. She says, like, I'm okay, I don't need that. What does that even mean? What is she talking about? The officer wasn't offering her anything. He was asking if she's okay, and then she starts mentioning that she has someone in the car who is very drunk, and then she immediately contradicts herself and says, it's her who is drunk, she's just trying to get him a good time, she's just trying to find her life. I mean, at this point, it's very clear that this woman is significantly impaired, her speech is slurred, her thoughts are everywhere, she can't maintain a coherent train of thought, and she's making no sense whatsoever. But here's what really got my attention in this first part of the encounter. The officer asks her if she's Uber or if she's a rideshare driver, and she says no, she's just military. She says, I just got back from deployment and he's here to be with me. Now I'm going to be careful here because I have nothing but respect for people who serve in our military. I think military service is honorable, and I think the vast majority of people who wear the uniform conduct themselves with integrity. But what I observe here is that this woman is immediately pulling the deployment card, the military card, as if that's going to somehow change how the officer responds. It's almost like she's saying, hey, I'm military, I just got back from deployment, you should cut me some slack. And I'm not saying that's consciously what she's doing, but the timing of it, right after she can't answer basic questions, right after she's driving erratically in dangerous conditions, it reads as deflection. It reads as her trying to establish some kind of special status that should exempt her from the consequences of her actions. The officer continues with his investigation and he's looking at her registration and she tells him she's got it on her phone and asks for a second. And then she starts asking him what base he operates out of and he tells her Eglin Air Force Base and she confirms that's where she's stationed. So now we know she's an active duty Air Force member stationed at Eglin in Florida. And she just got back from deployment, and she's driving drunk in a thunderstorm. This is the kind of thing that should not happen. Someone with that level of training, someone who has sworn an oath to defend this country, should know better than to get behind the wheel after drinking, especially in conditions like this. And then comes the moment that everyone remembers from this video. The officer asks her to step out of the vehicle, and she starts getting more emotional, more confused, and she says, "Hold on, this is my lieutenant, I'm sorry." And then she makes a phone call. She's calling her lieutenant. Now I need to explain something about the military chain of command. In the military, there is a hierarchy. You have officers above you, you have non-commissioned officers above you, and you follow that chain of command. It's fundamental to how the military operates. But here's the thing. That chain of command has absolutely no jurisdiction over civilian law enforcement. Her lieutenant cannot order the police officer to let her go. Her lieutenant cannot make a DUI stop disappear. Her lieutenant cannot override her constitutional rights. And yet, she clearly believes that this call is going to help her. She clearly believes that her connection to someone in her chain of command is going to change the situation. This is a fascinating insight into how some people view their own privilege. How some people think that their status, their rank, their connections somehow elevate them above the laws that everyone else has to follow. So she's on the phone and she's trying to explain what's happening, but she can barely get the words out. She says, "I got the police officers here. I gotta go. Just text us, please." And the person on the other end is clearly confused, doesn't really understand what's happening. And then she asks if she can signal text, which makes no sense at all. I mean, at this point, it's painfully obvious that this woman is significantly intoxicated. Her brain is not functioning properly. Her ability to communicate is severely impaired, and she's on the phone trying to get help from someone who can't help her because her lieutenant has no authority in this situation. The officer is trying to conduct his business, and she's being completely uncooperative. She tells him he's shining the light on nothing, which doesn't make sense. She tells him she's being sweet, which also doesn't make sense. The officer is just trying to do his job, trying to get a proper light on her face to check for signs of impairment, and she's making it as difficult as possible. Not because she's being malicious, but because her brain simply isn't working correctly due to the alcohol. The officer asks her to step out of the vehicle for field sobriety exercises, and she responds with complete confusion. She says things like, "What in the world did he just say? I don't understand, to be honest. He has been sitting here saying, 'Just take the ride.' I'm so sorry. She's going to jail." And then she says she would not like to do any sobriety exercises, field sobriety exercises. She's refusing to do them. And her reasoning is, "'Cause I've been doing so good, I have not done anything wrong." This is an amazing statement. She has been driving erratically in a rainstorm. She can barely form sentences. She smells like alcohol, and she's claiming she hasn't done anything wrong. This is the denial, the complete lack of awareness about the severity of the situation that we see so often in these cases. The officer explains that she is lawfully detained and that she needs to follow his commands. And she responds by saying she's an Uber. She says, "I'm an Uber." Wait, what? She's claiming to be an Uber driver now? I've never heard anyone claim to be Uber during a DUI stop. And the officer's response is perfect. He says, "I don't care, stay in the car." That's really all there is to say, isn't it? I don't care what your story is. I don't care who you are. You're on a traffic stop, and you're going to follow my commands. The officer continues to explain that if she refuses to perform the field sobriety exercises, he's going to have to make his decision based on everything he's seen and heard so far. He asks her again if she wants to perform the exercises or if she's going to refuse. She refuses. And he explains that her refusal can be used against her in court. And she says, that's fine. So she's refused the field sobriety exercises, which is going to make it much harder for the prosecution to prove impairment. And she's essentially admitted that she knows her refusal can be used against her. But she doesn't care. She's still in this mindset that she hasn't done anything wrong, that she's going to be able to talk her way out of this, that somehow the system is going to work in her favor. Now let's talk about the passenger in this case because his behavior is remarkable. Throughout this entire encounter, the passenger has been escalating things, getting more and more agitated, refusing to stay in the vehicle when ordered to do so. The officers explained that under a Supreme Court case called Maryland versus Wilson, they have the authority to order passengers to stay in the vehicle during a traffic stop. It's a safety measure. Passengers are detained during the stop just like the driver. But this passenger doesn't want to follow those commands. He keeps trying to get out of the vehicle, keeps arguing with the officers, and eventually he's placed in handcuffs for resisting arrest. The passenger's claim is that he's done nothing wrong, that he hasn't been drinking, that he's just picking up people from the influence, but he's not a rideshare driver. He's not a tow truck operator. He's a friend who got in the car with a drunk driver, and now he's facing the consequences of that decision. His resistance, his refusal to follow commands, his escalating behavior, all of that results in additional charges. In the final accounting, this passenger was charged with resisting arrest without violence. It's a minor charge compared to what the driver is facing, but it's still a criminal charge that will go on his record. And it all could have been avoided if he had simply done what he was told, stayed in the vehicle, and let the officer conduct his investigation. The officer who is handling the driver is also dealing with the passenger situation, and at one point he asks his partner for a rundown on the passenger. His partner explains that the passenger kept trying to get out of the vehicle, kept ignoring commands, and that's why they detained him. The officer acknowledges that this could lead to additional charges for the passenger, specifically for resisting arrest. Meanwhile, the driver is getting more and more emotional. She's asking for her dad. She's crying. She's claiming she hasn't done anything wrong. She's trying every angle she can think of to get out of this situation. The lieutenant call didn't work. The I'm military card didn't work. The refusal of tests didn't make the officer go away. So now it's time for the emotional appeal, time to try to get sympathy, time to try to find some way out of this. And here's something really interesting. The officer reveals to her that he is also a veteran. He served in the Air Force. He was in Iraq. He knows what deployment is like. He's been there. And he uses this shared experience to try to connect with her, to try to get her to calm down, to try to get her to understand that she's not in trouble because she's military. She's in trouble because she broke the law. He says to her, "Airman to airman, I got you." That's a powerful moment. He's not trying to punish her. He's trying to help her. He knows that a DUI arrest can destroy a military career. He's giving her a chance to handle this with dignity. But her response is still to claim she's been respectful, to claim she hasn't done anything wrong. That's not the response of someone who is accepting responsibility. That's the response of someone who still doesn't understand what she's done wrong. That's the response of someone who thinks she's the victim here, not the perpetrator. Now let's move to what happened in court, because the outcome of this case is really fascinating and it illustrates some very important points about how the legal system handles DUI cases. The suspect was charged with reckless driving and resisting arrest without violence. She was also issued traffic violations for no proof of insurance and 2 counts of running a stop sign. She was issued a $1,000 bond, which she later posted. So far, this looks like a standard DUI case, maybe heading toward a plea deal or a trial. But here's where it gets interesting. In court, she initially pleaded not guilty to both charges. The prosecutor later dropped the charge of resisting arrest without violence. This is significant. The resisting charge was likely related to her refusal to follow commands during the stop, but the prosecution decided they couldn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, or they decided it wasn't worth pursuing given the more serious charges. She later pleaded no contest to the remaining charge of reckless driving. A no contest plea, or nolo contendere, means she doesn't admit guilt but accepts the punishment as if she had been found guilty. It's a way to resolve the case without a full trial, and it's often used in plea deals. She was sentenced to 6 months of probation and ordered to serve 50 hours of community service. Under her plea deal, she could complete the community service or buy out the hours at $14 per hour. She chose to buy out the community service, paying a total of $700 for the 50 hours. Now here's what I really want you to notice. There was no DUI charge filed. She was never charged with driving under the influence. The prosecutor chose to pursue reckless driving instead. Why? The answer lies in the evidence, or rather, the lack of evidence. She refused the field sobriety tests. She refused the breathalyzer. Without that evidence, proving that her blood alcohol content was above the legal limit at the time she was driving becomes very difficult. The officer can testify that she seemed impaired, that her speech was slurred, that she smelled like alcohol. But without the scientific evidence, a good defense attorney could create reasonable doubt. Reckless driving, on the other hand, is easier to prove. The officer witnessed the erratic driving, the failure to stop, the collision with the curb. That's all evidence of reckless driving, and it doesn't require proving that alcohol was the cause. It's a lesser charge, but it's a charge that sticks. This is an important lesson, folks. If you're going to drink, don't drive. But if you do drive and you get pulled over, remember that your choices have consequences. Refusing tests might seem like a good idea at the time, but it can result in license suspension, and it can result in plea deals that leave you with a conviction on your record anyway. The best choice is always to designate a sober driver, to call a rideshare, to wait until you're sober before getting behind the wheel. I want to take a moment to address the military aspect of this case because it's important and it's something that a lot of people are probably wondering about. In the military, there is something called the Uniform Code of Military Justice, or UCMJ. It's the foundation of military law, and it applies to all active duty service members. Under the UCMJ, service members can be prosecuted for conduct that would not be criminal for civilians. This includes things like conduct unbecoming, disrespect toward a superior officer, and a whole host of other offenses. A civilian DUI conviction can trigger military justice proceedings. Even if the civilian court lets you off with a plea to reckless driving, even if the DUI charge is dropped, your commanding officer can still decide to pursue disciplinary action under the UCMJ. This could include non-judicial punishment, which is sometimes called Article 15 or Captain's Mass depending on the branch. It could include restriction, reduction in rank, extra duties, and even discharge from the military. I don't have information about whether this airman's commanding officer pursued any action under the UCMJ. That's not public information, and it's internal to the military. But what I can tell you is that this is something that hangs over the head of every service member who gets a civilian DUI. The civilian case might be over in a few months, but the military consequences can last for years. They can end a career, they can affect retirement benefits, they can follow you for the rest of your life. And here's another thing to consider. She mentioned several times during the stop that she served on an AC-130. For those who don't know, the AC-130 is a legendary gunship, a massive aircraft armed with cannons and missiles that provides close air support for ground troops. It's one of the most dangerous assignments in the military. The men and women who crew these aircraft are among the most highly trained, most disciplined, most professional warfighters in the world. To think that someone with that level of training, that level of experience, that level of responsibility would make the decision to drink and drive is troubling. It suggests either a complete lack of judgment, a serious problem with alcohol, or some combination of both. And whatever the cause, it's not something that the Air Force is going to overlook. This woman's career, if it hasn't already ended, is certainly in jeopardy. Let's bring this all together. On March 15, 2025, an active duty Air Force member, just returned from deployment, chose to drink and drive in a Florida thunderstorm. She drove erratically, failed to stop when signaled, struck a curb, and then attempted to use her military status to avoid accountability. When that didn't work, she refused standard tests, called her lieutenant, who never materialized, and eventually called her father for help. The passenger in her vehicle escalated the situation by resisting commands, resulting in his own arrest. Both subjects were taken into custody. In court, the driver faced charges of reckless driving and resisting arrest. The resisting charge was dropped. She pleaded no contest to reckless driving and was sentenced to 6 months probation and 50 hours of community service, which she bought out for $700. There was never a DUI charge filed, likely because she refused the breathalyzer and there was insufficient evidence to prove impairment beyond a reasonable doubt. Was justice served? That's a complicated question. On one hand, she was held accountable for her actions. She has a conviction on her record. She paid a price. On the other hand, she never faced a DUI charge, which is what most people would expect in this situation. She bought her way out of community service, which creates a certain amount of cynicism about the outcome. And the impact on her military career, which could be far more significant than any civilian penalty, remains unknown. What this case really highlights is the danger of drinking and driving. It doesn't matter who you are, what you've done, what you've sacrificed, what you've accomplished. If you get behind the wheel after drinking, you're risking your life. the lives of others, and everything you've worked for. The only safe choice is to not drink and drive. Ever. Period. The officer in this case, despite everything, showed compassion. He let her dad come get the car rather than having it towed. He treated her with dignity even as he was taking her to jail. That's the mark of a professional. Someone who understands that his job is to enforce the law, but that doesn't mean he has to be cruel about it. All right, everyone, that's going to do it for this one. I'm Mark Stevens, and we'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there, and remember, if you drink, don't drive. Make the right choice.